much for making a little bit of time to meet with us today and to talk about an interesting topic, Genchi Genbutsu. Maybe explain a little bit, how did you fall into that topic? How did you become aware of that? And how would you explain that to somebody quickly in an elevator, if you have to very quickly tell them what that term means?
Thank you very much. Thank you very much for your invitation, and happy to be here. I am indeed Alette Vonk. I'm a lecturer in Intercultural Management and a trainer. I have my own company as well. I do both university and in the field. And I had heard of the Toyota Way and the different principles of the Toyota Way already earlier, but I heard about Genchi Genbutsu especially when I was writing a book, a small booklet, Cultural Confluence in Organizational Change. I wrote it together with my co-author, who's Vasco Silva. And what it is literally, Genchi means the actual location, so it's a place. And Genbutsu literally means the actual material, the product that is being made. So usually it's being translated as go and see for yourself on the location where the product is actually either made or used. So it's really going and seeing at the production floor, or there's other examples as well. But it's a matter of very close observation, very deep observation actually, and being, for instance, one of the examples of the Toyota production system is, or one of the things they do for training is draw a circle on the production floor and stand in the circle, sometimes even up to 8 hours. That is one of the training they do. And just be there and listen very carefully, observe very carefully, and think for yourself. Don't interact, but think for yourself, what is actually happening here? Taking time to go and see for yourself, to thoroughly understand the situation. That is what Genchi Genbutsu is about. And every time again, go back home and study what you know. Postpone judgment is an important part of it as well. Don't judge until you really come further into the process of understanding what is actually going on.
Thank you, Alette. Good explanation.
Thank you.
That local knowledge, every time when one goes back to the floor or back to the production system, one gains some new local knowledge. There are these terms, ethic and emic.
Yes.
Can you explain to me what those two terms mean?
Yeah, ethic and emic research, there are actually two ways of doing cultural research. And I always use the association with ethic research is like a helicopter view. So you go up like a helicopter and you're able to look down and compare different situations. So you fly on top of it, let's say. One of the golden standards of cultural research is done by Professor Hofstede, the late Professor Hofstede, I should say. So what he did, he really found certain basic differences between cultures. And then he made comparison between, for instance, Angola or New Zealand, Japan, Portugal, the Netherlands, etc. So you take the helicopter view and you're able to then compare the culture between New Zealand and Japan, for instance. That is ethic research. And it's very frequently, it's a very interesting way to start a research and understand cultural differences better. Now, emic research is more the ethnographic way of doing research. So you have one culture and you don't take the helicopter view, but you use the spade and you dig deep into that one culture. So it's more anthropological, it's more ethnographic. So Genchi Genbutsu falls into the emic way. It's not the helicopter this time, flying above it and making comparison between different cultures or countries. But the emic research, really, you are digging deeper into one culture. It's really getting deeper into what is happening exactly. How do local people now see leadership, for instance, or organization, or what is an organization, what is a company, what is a foreign company, etc., etc. Yeah.
Thank you, Alette. It's interesting that you mentioned Professor Hofstede, and power distance was one of the variables that he spoke about. And one of the things that I've noticed when I was working on farms in Africa is that when the manager arrives, then suddenly we work differently compared to where the manager is not there.
Yes.
Tell us a little bit about that observer effect and how does that interact with Genchi Genbutsu?
When you talk about when the leader arrives in Africa, it has to do with how do the people observe hierarchy. It's one of the basic differences Hofstede found that different cultures have different ways of dealing with hierarchy and with how the power is being distributed. And I can imagine that at the moment people had the boss arrives or the leader or the manager arrives, and indeed people fall in line, and they, out of respect. It's not very frequently in the West, people then feel that people are afraid of the boss. But it's not so much fear, it is really out of respect that they really show the boss that this is who I am, and I respect you by doing the things the way you want me to do them. So the observer effect is there. You are always part of the situation, and especially as a leader, you are. So you cannot get out of it all the way. It will, and it even in the natural sciences, the observer is still has an effect on the situation, let alone in situations like this. The way to, you have to find your way then to get the information. For instance, ask people privately about certain things. You have to go out and search for information. They will not usually come to you and tell you, because a negative message, people don't like to give a negative message to a leader in a culture where there's more hierarchy. So you really have to go out as a leader. When I was in Africa myself, we had a Dutch country manager, and he said, I have an open door policy, and everybody can walk into my office and just come and say something. But usually people wouldn't come to, no, they will not, go to the boss. It is the boss that actually has to go out. So in a less hierarchical situation, if there's no news to the boss, that is good news. He thinks everything is okay. But that's not the case in more hierarchical cultures. You really have to go out, and you have to go and check and control and ask people and be there. But as an observer, in every situation, even if you're on the same hierarchical level, you will always have a certain effect on the situation. That is also why Genchi Genbutsu is so interesting, because if you are there long enough, like in the circle on the production floor, if you are there for an hour, people will still tiptoe around maybe, or do everything correctly. But if you're there for 3 hours, they tend to forget, and the usual behavior starts kicking in. So that's why it is such an interesting tool indeed to be there for longer periods of time, and in that case maybe even not interact, don't say anything. Well, of course, after 5 hours, people are doing what they are doing, and then you get your real information, the information you need.
That's a
Yeah,
very valuable, yeah, it's a very valuable tip there is to become invisible over time. Because certainly when you walk
that's
in
right.
the first minute, you definitely change the environment. But me
Yeah.
as a leader or the manager as a leader, when they go to the factory floor or they do that observation, you did talk earlier about judging, kind of
Hmm.
suspending judgment and
Yeah.
training my eye. Do you want to talk a little bit more about how does one manage oneself during this process?
Yeah, that it's like mindfulness actually, huh? It's like really, I mean, some people are better trained than others, and I think it would take quite some training to really indeed create that invisibility and pull yourself out of the situation more or less, and think deeply, think mindfully, and try not to be there in a way that the other one doesn't see that you are there, but still you are there thinking for yourself. So it's this is, I think it takes a lot of practice, but there's also another example where Genchi Genbutsu was being used, which is a very different one, is when they started developing the Sienna minivan, so a car, a minivan for the American markets. And the Japanese president of the Kentucky plant, it was a plant they had there, he asked, I want to really use this car in America. I don't know America, so I don't know the market there. And he actually asked for making a trip through all the 50 states of the United States, through all the, I think, 13 provinces of Canada, and also all the way around in Mexico. So it's a very long trip. Again, taking time is very important part of Genchi Genbutsu. And then after that, they really completed, they changed the development of the minivan completely. They created a new product. So that is not this making yourself invisible. It is using the product, but then also looking and seeing and observing what is going on and how this ban is being used on all these different terrains.
Thank you, Alette. Alette, I want to step a little bit away from Genchi Genbutsu and tap into your a wonderful brain that you have there about cultures and diversity. And one of the things that we notice in a lean system, let's call it a lean a Toyota lean system, I have to change my mind when I walk from my deeply rooted culture outside the factory into the factory. Where in the Japanese context, it appears that the culture outside in the society is very similar, and we bring those cultural norms into the factory. So there's an easier match between the lean system and my traditional culture. But that does not work in all other countries. In some countries, there's a different culture outside the production system compared to inside. Am I right? Am I looking at this too simplistically? And how does one manage that kind of transformation that one needs to go through in order to create a good, strong operational system at the end of the day?
Yes, if I may use then the ethic research to make that comparison, because you are comparing, right? So, for instance, if you look at Japan, it has another basic differences that Hofstede came up with is long-term orientation, and it's not only Hofstede, by the way. There's continuous research going on these ethic ideas. Um, Japan has a long-term orientation, cultural-wise. And that means this is true for both the whole society and family life and also in company life. So this long-term, short-term orientation, it there you can see that Genchi Genbutsu is being created in Japan because it fits the culture far better. Another one is the uncertainty avoidance, the need for certainty. In Japan, there's a very high need for certainty. Everything is structured. They really take control. Everything is very detailed. In detail, they look at all the different parts of the process of the product, of the way things are being done. While maybe in New Zealand, it is more, okay, this works, let's do it. It's short-term oriented. Short-term oriented, but also less need for certainty. Now, if you take such a tool like Genchi Genbutsu, or an instrument, whatever you want to call it, but or way of for the Japanese, it's not a tool actually. Even me using the word tool is telling you something about my way of. It becomes an instrument, and it becomes. You need less certainty for a tool. For them, it's a way of life, and then. Taking such an instrument and putting it in another culture, it really needs adjustment. It will adjust itself by itself, by the way, it will. And if you want to do it more according to Japanese way, when, for instance, you want to do it in New Zealand, it takes a long time for it to stick. That's both for the human being. Will adjust, but also the tool itself will be adjusted. That's the confluence we are talking about. It takes both ways to really get settled into a certain way of working. But don't forget, we are wired culturally when we grow up as children, all of us. That's part of human nature, that we become neurally wired in our head to think in a certain way. So it will not be possible for you or me to become Japanese. It's not possible. But we can, with time and a lot of effort and a lot of attention, we can, of course, adjust ourselves. It's all living matter, even in our heads. It's living. It's not fixed. But very frequently, it is far more difficult than people actually think, because when we grow up as children, we become neurally, these neural paths in our heads are actually made, and it becomes very unconscious. So the first thing to do actually is to become conscious of your own culture. And then you understand, but this is why it irritates me when somebody says yes, and in the end, you have the feeling that, you have an appointment or something, and then the person doesn't show up, or the deadline seems to be interpreted in a different way. And then you understand, but this is my culture. I thought the person said yes, but maybe in reality, in some other sentence, there was a no somewhere, and you haven't heard it. So this indirect and direct communication, of course, is also really, really a part of it. So it takes effort, and it takes deep, mindful thinking. And I think indeed these cultural dimensions of Hofstede, they can really be a good first step to understand where the other one is actually coming from. And then, of course, experience.
I'm so glad I asked that last question. What a fascinating topic, a fascinating answer. So it's interesting that you mentioned that cultural assimilation. New Zealand does have a strong Maori influence, and so we do understand that longer term view also. But I can certainly see that yes, you cannot just simply bring a culture from somewhere else over. There's going to be some kind of assimilation before one finds a sweet spot, and that's really an interesting challenge. What a lovely conversation. Thank you so much for giving me 20 minutes of your time today, and I'm sure all the students are going to love this.
Okay, thank you.